All right, guys, welcome to the unit on the nervous system. This is going to be our unit 7. In this PowerPoint, we're going to talk about the different divisions of the nervous system. There are 2 of them. We're going to break them down. We'll talk about what the structure of a neuron looks like. So a neuron is a nerve cell. What the structure of a neuron looks like and how an impulse travels down a nerve cell. We'll talk about functions of the nervous system as a whole, how different neurons are classified, whether they carry information in, integrate information, or carry information out. And then we'll talk about how signals are sent between neurons within the system. We will talk about reflexes, which are rapid responses to a stimuli. So we'll talk about that. And then we'll talk very briefly about the different parts of the brain. Okay, so fill out your papers as you go along with this PowerPoint. We'll start with the divisions of the nervous system. So you can see in this picture here, there's the brain and the spinal cord shown in red, and then there are all these lines projecting out of the brain and spinal cord shown in blue. Those are the 2 divisions of the nervous system. The central nervous system is comprised of the brain and the spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system shown in blue here are all of the nerves that extend off of the brain and spinal cord to carry information to the rest of the body. And the peripheral nervous system can actually be broken down a little bit further. There are 2 different categories that fall under the peripheral nervous system. There's the somatic nervous system, which is voluntarily controlled. So these nerves control your skeletal muscles, all the muscles that anything you're able to move would be part of the somatic nervous system. And then the autonomic nervous system is involuntary. So your digestive tract digesting food is part of the autonomic nervous system. You can't control it. And then the autonomic nervous system is further broken down into 2 more subdivisions. And those subdivisions are the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. And I think we'll talk about the sympathetic and the parasympathetic in a minute. All right, so this is just a little diagram to show you sort of how signals travel through the body. The central nervous system is the processing center. So this is where we process information. The blue box and arrow show information coming into the brain and spinal cord, and the red box and arrow show information coming out. So our sense organs, meaning our skin, our ears, our taste buds, our nose, anything that receives signals from the outside world and carries them to the brain, would be sensory neurons. They carry those, and that would be part of the peripheral nervous system. They carry information to the central nervous system, which is the brain and or the spinal cord. And here the information is processed so we can see whether it's worth the energy to pay attention to it. Most of the things that come in, we don't even recognize. And I'm going to show you a clip on that in a minute. And then if it's important to our brain, then it will send a signal out back to the peripheral nervous system, back through the neurons to our muscles or glands, where we'll have some sort of response. That's either an autonomic response, which is involuntary. So maybe our heart starts to beat faster. Maybe we start to sweat. Maybe our eyes dilate. Or a somatic response where maybe our muscles move, but we start to run away. And you can see that here. So this is same diagram from the previous page, but just a real life situation here. Peripheral nervous system, our eyes see or our ears hear a bear in the woods. Okay, so the sensory division conducts an action potential, and we'll talk about action potentials in a minute, from the body to the central nervous system. So our eyes and ears sense that there's a bear. That signal gets carried to the brain in the central nervous system. The brain processes and integrates the information and decides, yes, this is important to pay attention to. How are we going to respond? So we initiate responses and carry out mental activities. So brain decides we need to respond, sends signals out through the somatic nervous system, where it tells our skeletal muscles, our voluntary skeletal muscles, to start running, and our autonomic nervous system, where it tells our heart to beat faster, our digestion slows down. That's why if you're nervous, you might not be hungry as much because your digestion slows. Your glands start to produce hormones, you start to sweat, you start to breathe faster. These are things you can't control. And it's all a response to get yourself out of danger, okay? So those are the two divisions of the nervous system, the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. And remember, the peripheral nervous system has two general categories, somatic and autonomic. And the autonomic nervous system has sympathetic and parasympathetic. Now, the difference between sympathetic and parasympathetic. Let's say you were, think back to high school. You're sitting in high school and the fire drill alarm comes on. And your initial response is you jump, your heart starts to beat, it might startle you. That's the sympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is your fight or flight, where it kicks you into gear. This right here, most of these, getting this guy running, that's the sympathetic nervous system. Increases heart rate, increases breathing rate, decreases digestion, dilates pupils. It just prepares your body to fight. The parasympathetic nervous system, on the other hand, is your response when you realize you're actually not in danger. So you startle and then you realize, oh, it's just a fire drill, and your heart rate slows back down and your breathing slows back down and you calmly stand up and go to the exit. That's the parasympathetic nervous system. So they work together with one another. All right, structure of the nervous system. What makes up the nervous system? Nervous system is made up of neurons, which are the main cells of the nervous system. And you've probably seen a picture of them before. I'll show you a picture of them on the next slide. Neurons are the cells of the nervous system that transmit messages throughout the body. So these are the nerves that carry those electrical signals from your sense organs to the brain, and then from the brain back out to your muscles and glands. The neuroglia are support cells of the nervous system. So they basically maintain the nervous system, maintain its function, help it to function, help support those neurons to do the job that they need to do. All right, so this is a neuron here. I think we've got a picture. Yes, this is a neuron. It's one single cell here. And you've got the main cell body, which contains the nucleus. It contains a couple other organelles. And off of the cell body, you see all these small little projections. Sort of looks like a tree with all of its branches. These branches coming off of the cell body are called the dendrites. And this is where information comes into a neuron. So you can see the arrows here. It always starts at the dendrites. The dendrites sense information that comes in. So that might be a sense of touch, a signal from another nearby neuron. So they sense these signals. They come in through the dendrite toward the cell body, travel through the cell body, and then they travel down the axon. Down the axon, this long single projection coming out of the neuron is an axon. Signals come down the axon to the axon terminal. And in the axon terminal, we'll talk about, I think on the next couple slides, are chemicals called neurotransmitters. So maybe you've heard of dopamine or serotonin, acetylcholine, it's like adrenaline. These things, you might have heard of them, but you don't really know what they are. They're chemicals that lie in the axon terminals of neurons, and they get released to send signals to the next neuron to continue the message to the brain or to muscles or glands. Okay, so dendrites bring information in, axons send information out. And you can always determine the direction that a signal is going to travel based on where the dendrites are and where the axon is. It will always travel from dendrite through the cell body, down the axon, and out. So in this image here, the signal goes left to right. If we were to flip it around and the dendrites were over here and the axon was over here, then it would go right to left. Okay, so it always goes dendrites to axons. I also want to show you, let's go back here. No, sorry, we'll stay here. For your labeling, again, these projections coming off of the neuron are dendrites. This large area right here is the cell body. Inside the center of the cell body is the nucleus, so this controls and directs the activity of the cell, just like all other cells. This long tail coming off of the axon is, coming off of the cell body is the axon. You'll see these little beads they look like beads. They're not actually beads. These are actually neuroglia. So these are those support cells I was talking to you about. They sort of wrap the axon in this myelin sheath, which insulates the axon and allows that signal to travel faster and more efficiently down the axon. You don't need to know much about those. I think in your labeling, it wants you to label it as the axon. But just so you know what those are neuroglia cells. And then these little knobs at the end are axon terminals, okay? All right, so I'm gonna stop this video here and start the next video for functions of the nervous system.